The Alpha King's beast brought her a motionless pup. What happened next left everyone speechless. A true real-life story. Nobody in the small mountain town had ever gotten close to the wolf they called Ghost. He had been roaming the forests on the edge of town for almost 6 years. The rangers knew him well, not because he caused trouble, but because he never did. He kept his distance. He led his pack quietly through the woods, stayed away from roads, stayed away from people, stayed away from everything that smelled like human. Trail cameras had caught him on footage dozens of times over the years, and in every single clip, the moment he sensed anything man-made nearby, he would simply turn and disappear back into the trees. He was a massive animal, gray coat, one notched ear from an old fight nobody had witnessed, eyes that looked almost amber in the camera flashes. The wildlife rangers had named him Ghost, because that was exactly what he was. Always there, never really seen. A shadow at the edge of things. And then one October morning, everything changed. The woman who lived at the edge of the forest had been there for nearly a decade. She had moved to that piece of land after leaving her nursing job in the city, and over the years, she had slowly turned the property into a small wildlife rehabilitation space. Not a big operation, just her, a few outdoor enclosures, and a deep, quiet understanding of animals that people who knew her said was almost difficult to explain. She had nursed foxes, injured hawks, a young deer with a broken leg, even a small black bear cub once. Animals that came to her in bad shape had a strange habit of leaving in good shape. She was not a flashy person. She did not post much online. She just lived quietly at the foot of the mountain and did the work she believed in. Her neighbors knew her as the woman you called when you found something hurt on the road. The rangers knew her as someone they could trust. That October, a journalist was staying at her place for a few days. He was writing a small feature about her rehabilitation work for a regional nature magazine, the kind of quiet, human interest piece that most people read on a Sunday afternoon, and then remember for years. He had set up a camera and recorder in her kitchen, and was documenting her daily routine. He was there the morning it happened. He had his camera ready, and when it was all over, he told people it was the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen in 20 years of journalism. It started before sunrise. She was up early, the way she always was. Coffee on, boots by the door. She checked her trail cameras, the way most people check their phones in the morning. A habit, something she did without thinking. And there he was, Ghost. Standing at the tree line at the far edge of her property. She had seen him on camera before. Always at a distance, always passing through. But this morning he wasn't passing through. He was standing still. And then he moved a few steps closer. Then he stopped again. Then he went back. He did this for almost 2 hours. She watched the footage with her coffee going cold in her hand. Something was wrong. She didn't know what, but she could feel it the way you feel a change in the weather before the clouds arrive. She mentioned it to the journalist. He smiled politely and said it was probably nothing. She didn't argue, but she kept watching. At a little past 7 in the morning, she stepped outside to check on her water troughs. The air was cold enough to see her breath. The ground was still damp from rain 2 nights before. She walked around the side of the house and stopped so suddenly that she almost stumbled. Ghost was standing in her driveway, not at the tree line, not on the edge of the property, in her driveway, less than 15 meters away. She did not scream. She did not run. She had been around enough animals in enough frightening situations to know that panic is the worst thing you can do. She stood completely still and looked at him, and he looked at her. He wasn't growling. His ears weren't back. His body wasn't tense in the way a wolf's body gets when it's preparing for something aggressive. He just looked at her, and then he looked down at his feet, and then he looked back up at her again. She dropped slowly into a crouch, making herself smaller, lowering her eyes slightly, every instinct from years of animal work kicking in at once. And she saw what was at his feet. A pup, tiny and still, silver-tipped fur, lying on the cold gravel, not moving. She barely breathed. She moved 1 inch at a time, watching Ghost the entire way. He held his ground. He watched her hands. He watched her face. He did not retreat, and he did not advance. He simply stayed, like a guard standing post, and let her come. When she was close enough to reach the pup, she heard Ghost make a sound, soft, low, nothing like a growl. People who study wolves would later say, it was a contact call. the kind of sound wolves use inside their pack to say, "I am here, I see you, everything is okay." She heard it, and felt something she later struggled to put into words. She picked up the pup with both hands. The pup was ice cold, barely breathing. 4 weeks old, maybe less. There were no injuries on her body, no blood, no bites. She had simply gotten separated from the pack at some point in the cold night, and had gone into the kind of shutdown that very small animals go into when their body heat drops dangerously low. She looked up at Ghost one more time. He was already turning away. He walked back toward the tree line with that slow, unhurried pace that large, confident animals move with. He did not look back. Within seconds he was gone, swallowed by the trees the way he had always been. Quietly, completely, like he had never been there at all. The journalist had watched the entire thing from behind the screen door, camera shaking in his hands. Inside, she moved fast. She wrapped the pup in a soft towel that she had warmed near the heater. She checked her breathing, shallow but there. She checked her gums, her eyes, her tiny heartbeat. The pup was in a bad way. Hypothermia in animals this small can turn fatal very quickly. There is a very narrow window, and she knew it. She worked the way she always worked. Calm hands, focused eyes, no wasted movement. A heating pad on the lowest setting under another towel. A warm syringe of rehydration fluid, just a little at a time. The journalist stood to the side, not daring to say a word, watching her work with the kind of quiet concentration that people show when they sense something important is happening. She called the local wildlife ranger. He arrived in under 40 minutes. When she told him what had happened out in the driveway, he stood there for a long moment without speaking. Then she showed him the trail camera footage. Ghost circling for hours in the dark. The slow approach, the delivery, the single look back. The ranger had been working wildlife management for over 20 years. He leaned over the tablet and watched the footage twice. Then he sat down. "I don't know what to say," he told her. "Wolves don't do this. This is not something that happens." But it had happened, and the pup in the towel on her kitchen table was proof. By midday, the pup moved. Just a small twitch at first. A leg pushing against the towel. A tiny reflex that meant warmth was reaching the parts of her body that had gone cold and still. By early afternoon, she was taking small amounts of warm milk from a syringe. By evening, she was squirming properly, fighting the towel, doing all the restless, impatient things that healthy, hungry pups do when they want to be somewhere other than where they are. And then she howled. It was the smallest, most uncertain sound. More of a question than a howl, really. Thin and a little wobbly, like she wasn't quite sure how to do it yet. But it was real. The woman who never cried sat at her kitchen table and cried. The rules around wolf pups are clear. A wild pup needs to go to a licensed wolf rehabilitation facility, not because the people caring for her aren't qualified, but because wild wolves need to stay wild. Too much time around humans in those early weeks can blur something essential in them, something that is very hard to get back. The pup needed to be with other wolves, raised with the right sounds and smells and social structure, so that when the time came, she could go back to the forest and live the life she was born to live. She agreed immediately. She had always known this was the plan, from the moment she picked the pup up off the gravel. You don't hold on to a wild thing. You hold it gently for as long as it needs you, and then you let it go. For 72 hours, she gave the pup everything she had: warmth, food, safety, calm. She didn't name her. She was careful about that. She talked to her softly while feeding her, but she kept her exposure to human voices and human smells as limited as she reasonably could, knowing every hour of those 3 days mattered for what came next. On the third morning, the ranger came with a transport carrier and drove the pup north to a wolf rehabilitation center 3 states away. She stood at her gate and watched the truck leave. She didn't wave. She just stood there until it was out of sight. The journalist published his piece 3 weeks later. It was supposed to be a quiet feature about a woman who nursed animals back to health. Instead, the trail camera footage went with it. Ghost circling in the dark, the approach, the delivery, the single low call before he turned and left. It spread, first through wildlife and conservation circles, then wider. Biologists from several countries asked to review the footage. Animal behaviorists wrote carefully worded statements saying that what was shown in the video was extraordinary, that purposeful, goal-directed behavior toward a human caregiver was not something that fit any standard model of wolf behavior. One researcher said it was the most compelling footage of cross-species communication she had ever seen. Others were more cautious, but none of them could explain it away. 11 days after the morning in the driveway, the trail cameras picked up Ghost again. He came to the exact spot where he had left the pup. He stood there for several minutes. He scent-marked the area, a wolf's way of saying I was here. And then he walked back into the trees. The pup spent 8 months at the rehabilitation center. She was introduced gradually to a surrogate pack, learned to be a wolf the proper way, got big and strong and wild. At 14 months, she was released into a protected wilderness corridor in the north. The last report from the tracking team said she was doing well, running with the pack, healthy, exactly what she was meant to be. Every journalist who interviewed the woman afterward asked her the same question. Why do you think he chose you? Why your driveway, your hands, out of everyone and everything in that forest? She always took a moment before answering. I think animals notice more than we give them credit for, she said in one interview. I think Ghost had been watching this property for a long time. He knew what happened here. He knew that things came in broken and left whole. And I think when his pup was dying, and he didn't know what to do, he remembered that. She paused for a moment. I don't think it was magic. I think it was trust. And I think trust, when it's real, doesn't really need a language.